Welcome to Carolina Sculpture Studio. My name's Clint Button, and I'm a granite sculptor. Let's talk about stone carving chisels. Give you an overview and a little bit of information for making your decisions for what you're doing. It's important to understand the different types of stone and how hard they are with what you're working. You've got sedimentary stone, which is layers built upon each other. And so you've got a pretty good grain. It's a pretty quick stone to work with, and it breaks in two planes very easily and fairly straight. You've got metamorphic stone, which is sedimentary stone that has been acted upon by heat and pressure and kneaded like bread dough. You take that layered up sedimentary rock and you twist it and knead it all up. And so that makes the grain go crazy. It doesn't have a grain to make it split evenly in one direction or the other. So you're limited in some ways with what you can do with it. But it makes it a more consistent, can make it a more consistent stone if it doesn't have inclusions in it. Granite is a pool of molten rock, molten stone, and it cools slowly underground where it's protected. It develops a very uniform crystalline structure, and I understand it's impacted by the magnetic poles as to how it develops what's called the run and the rift. And the granite will split very flat in one plane, and the other plane it'll tend to either run up or down, and it will have a lift to it. And then the third plane, it's like looking at the end of a piece of board or something. It's very strong. It doesn't snap as easily in that third plane. So granite's very hard, very strong, and then there's other stones that are a lot harder than granite that do get carved, and so you've got to do special things with your chisels for them to avoid damaging your tools. But the tools that are typically used for different stone, let's start with some hand-driven tools. These are what's called a button head chisel, and this feature means that this tool is always supposed to be struck with either a wooden mallet or a more modern poly mallet. And these, I like these a lot. These are out of England, and they're really great because they never shed and they never change their balance. And if you're working a lot, having your balance change on your tool does matter. It can add up. And so if this expedites in your work, I like these a lot. I've got a big one and a small one and a big one, and they work really well. This pole indicates, or button indicates, the way this tool is manufactured. This is hardened because if this was regular steel and it was smaller, it would dig in and eat your tool up really fast. So this has been heat treated to a certain hardness, and this cutting edge has also been drawn out on an anvil and heat treated. These teeth, they draw it out, they get it shaped, they get everything right, and then they use a grinder with a V steel wheel to cut each one of these. They just put it up when it's running red hot, and they just dress this wheel to the shape they want, and they sharpen it. That's how you produce those teeth, the old-fashioned way. That's the correct way to do it. So this is heat treated, this is heat treated. This is not. This is relatively soft because the stone is soft, so you don't have to have a hard tool to absorb the energy because the energy is transferred relatively easily. Problems arise when people hit this with a steel hammer that's made from marble. They do this, and this pole breaks off. Then you've got a tool like this. Now, some people might think, well, hey, that's no problem. We'll just use that with a steel hammer. The problem is because this is relatively soft, when you drive that, this ends up getting crooked. It bends it. It'll actually collapse a tool. It'll bow it. This will deform very rapidly. And if you use this smaller head against this, it'll eat your mallet or your dummy up, and you don't want that. So the best thing to do with this tool would be to have a blacksmith put a new button on it. But that's an example of a misused tool. This is a point. And there's a couple more here that came in with the same lot of tools. This is another one that's been dressed way down, and it's not ideal. Then you've got marble chisels. Now, marble chisels look very much like a broken limestone chisel. You're going to have multiple sides, 6 to 8 sides. And there used to be a protocol about how many sides meant what, how it was tempered, but that's sort of been lost. This is a marble chisel that's hardened here so that it resists the energy, the force. It's been tempered here so that it's sharp the way you need it to be after it's been drawn out, and then they heat treat it. The pole tends to be soft, so when you strike it with your hammer, whether you use the side or whether you use the front, it tends to curl and mushroom without chipping. If this was hardened, this would chip and blow out, and you don't want that. You're supposed to keep all those curls dressed off so they don't blow off. You can be all romantic and have a bunch of noodly curls on there, but that's not the way your tools are well maintained. So, and for any of these tool steel chisels to be properly reworked, you can just keep dressing them down. Whether you do it on a power grinder, you have to keep it cool to protect the temper, or you can do it on, a diamond hone or a sharpening stone by hand, which isn't real efficient. But these are all drawn out to maintain their width. You take it in the blacksmith would just draw it out a little bit more and then heat treat it. Now, marble tools, they can get really big. They should be dressed off like that. Then you've got your powered tools, and these are for a hand machine. Now, this is probably for marble. You can use it on limestone. It's designated that way because it's got multiple sides. It's got 6 sides. Now, this has carbide in it. Soft stone is suitable for a harder grade of carbide. Carbide is basically, think about, you take a giant mixer and mix up a bunch of powder, and then you press the carbide into the shape the block you want, and then you cut it and machine it, and you have all of these pieces of carbide that are then put in a big kiln or furnace, and they're cooked, they're baked. And that creates a carbide blank it's very strong depending on the recipe, and it's heat stable. So you no longer have to worry about keeping this cooled with water when you're sharpening it. And with marble and limestone, because the medium's softer, you can use a harder or more brittle grade of carbide that you actually can sharpen to a sharper edge. With granite, and that's usually denoted by this either hexagon or octagonal tool. This one's got 6 sides. There's some in this kit that have 8 sides. And so these are interchangeable for marble or limestone. I wouldn't put this on granite without especially a tooth chisel, because that's just not what you use on granite. On granite, because it's a more difficult product to cut, you typically have a tool that has a square shank on it. And this tool the whole tool is forged, done whatever, and then heated to normalize it, and then finished in like a oil or whatever. That's the way they did it, one of the tool companies down there. Most tools now are done with carbide. Carbide wasn't normal in the industry until, my sculptor said until he bought the studio in '85, there was never a piece of carbide in the building because his father wouldn't pay for it because it cost too much. So up until the mid '80s or '90s, there were still people that carved a lot of work in granite with tool steel. And tool steel has some benefits. It's much more elastic and is less brittle, and so it's less likely to chip or blow out if it's handled properly. But you can't sharpen it quite the same as you can with carbide, but you could have, there's different benefits with drills and things like that to have tool steel. Now I could take this tool steel chisel and square it off and solder an appropriate sized piece of carbide on there and build a brand new tool and use it, and it's great. That's why I've got lots of spares of these, because people don't use them anymore and they don't feel like getting carbide put on them. So, but to braze a piece of carbide on that costs a few dollars onto a tool with some rod that is relatively cheap to buy. See if I've got an easy to see one. Here's one right here. I was brought up that you always have to have a steel tool that's been slotted for the carbide to be inserted, and then you braze it, and these shoulders provide support so you don't break the carbide when you're carving and rough, especially for rough out work. Well, soon after opening my studio, I met an old man that said, well, that's a nice story, but let me show you something. And all of his tools, he just butt brazed the carbide right onto the shank. And so there's a couple of reasons for that. You could buy this rod anywhere. You know, the regular welding supply store, and most of them have this brazen rod in stock. And so you build a shoulder up on each side of the carbide to provide the same support as you do in a steel chisel. The added benefit is that when you sharpen this tool and you get down to the end, you just stop and you flick that little piece of carbide out, and you put a new piece in and braze it up and keep going. And until your shank wears out, the tool never shortens up. If you put a slot in this tool every time, it's kind of like this tool. It ends up getting so short that it's uncomfortable to work with. Now, this short tool, give you another example. This is a little short, 2/3 the length of a full-length tool. These are guaranteed bloody knuckle tools, and this is for the newbies that don't know the difference. You tell them to go pick out tools, and they'll all go grab a little tool because they think it's easier to handle. Well, they're going to beat their knuckles and hands all to pieces, either hitting a stone like that if it's a hand-driven tool, or having their hand down scrubbing on the stone the whole time because the tool's so short. You want a tool that's got some length to it, because you've got a better utility with it. So this will probably get either drawn out, I'll heat it up in the forge and hammer it out, or I'll cut it off and put a cube on it and make it into a 9-point or a 4-point. There are some specific tools, like this small F&K, H&K little pistol grip machine uses a unique type of shank, and this is, I assume it's proprietary. This is what these tools use. And so, and these do have a carbide tip on them, but tool steel carbide, you can carve with either. Now, this tool, because it's round, it has very little grip. It would suggest to me that it's got a really big shank. This won't fit in a regular machine. This is going to fit in a great big big machine. And so this is probably for soft stone. I know this is for limestone. That's where it came from. But if I didn't know, because I saw it was round, and because of the manufacturer's name on it, I know it's a professional stone chisel. Seeing that it's just round and knurled, I would understand that this is for working soft stone, because if I was trying to carve granite with this, I'd have to hold it really hard to keep it from rotating in ways I didn't want it to rotate. And it is important to understand that a chisel, it doesn't matter if it's for marble, hand-driven, if it's for granite, machine-driven, limestone, whatever. This is the cutting edge, right along the whole tool, okay? Not the corner and not the corner. The first thing people, when you see a video and the first thing they do is dig in with a corner and dig everything out, they're using the wrong tool. They're going to blow off their corners, they're going to wreck tools, and that's the first thing that newbies do, new people, new carvers, new artists, whatever. And that's not the way the tools are supposed to be used. If you're going to evacuate stone, you need to be using either a point that's, whether it's a tool steel point in soft stone, or you need to be using a round chisel in granite to open up a line to cut to. You don't spend all your time living on the corners, because the corners will break off. It'll ruin your tool. So that's just in general, that's the biggest mistake that you see anybody carving stone do, is all their square chisels, all their straight chisels will all have blown corners because they've blown the corner off. And then to make it straight again, you surrender a significant amount of tool to get back to that point. So I hope that gives you some insight. Let me, one more thing here. A claw, tooth with a bunch of teeth, or a tooth chisel that's sharp, is not meant for hard stone. That's meant for a limestone or a marble. When you see a multi-tooth chisel for granite that has a square cross section, this is for ripping. This creates a channel. You go back and forth and create a straight channel, whether you want that carved there, you're doing an edge, or you need something to break to open it up. It's called a ripper. Now, people will say you have to have special tools for marble versus granite. I use my granite chisels for carving marble and limestone on a regular basis. When I need a sharp tool to do that with, I just cut some teeth in it. I have a green wheel to sharpen all my tools, all my carbide tools. And I have my grinder set up with a 1-inch green wheel and a one that's, I think, a 3/16. It's about like this. And I dress it to a V, and then I can cut on that green wheel. I can cut my teeth, and the marble doesn't know any different. I can go and carve my marble just fine, and I don't have to have special tools on the shelf for it. So that's one way to multitask or get more utility out of your tools. But I hope that gives you some insight. There's a lot to it. You need to use the right tools for the job. There is some overlap where certain tools can serve multiple purposes, but there's other times when they can't. And but a lot of times people don't understand why this tool needs a mallet, why this tool needs a steel hammer, and why the carbide in a soft stone chisel may be brittle and break for granite, but you can use granite chisels to carve softer stone, and it doesn't bother them. So I won't get into sharpening everything now. That's a different video. You need to learn to sharpen tools if you're going to carve much stone, but and it's not difficult. You just have to practice. So, I hope this helps out, gives you some ideas and a little more information, and go back and carve some stone. So, once again, my name's Clint Button here at Carolina Sculpture Studio. Thanks for coming in.